Hey, Mike with Nerd Problems Gaming here. In today's video, I'll be walking you through a review and how to play video on the board game Everdell, so let's get into it. Alright, so now that we got the game out, let's walk you through how to play Everdell, the basic setup and rules, and then once you have a better idea on how the game works, I'll jump into my review after that. So Everdell is a worker placement game that takes place in the Valley of Everdell, and you'll play as a bunch of woodland creatures, building a city and gathering resources during the spring, summer, and fall in order to prepare their city for the coming winter. So it's a game for 1 to 4 players that will typically take around an hour, give or take, depending on the number of players. And so for the basic setup of the game, the first thing you'll want to do is set up the Ever tree. And so it's pretty simple, but there's some instructions within the game to show you how to do that. And so once you've done that, each player will start with 2 base workers, and then you're going to place a worker on the spring location, summer, and then 2 on the autumn for each player. On top of that, you're going to want to set out the different resources on the board. So you can see there's a pile for sticks, resin, stone, and berries. You'll want to set the point tokens on the side as well as the occupied tokens on the side. You'll flip up 8 cards in the meadow in the middle of the table. Deal out the first player 5 cards, the second player 6 cards, third player 7, fourth player 8, and then you'll put the remaining cards underneath the Ever tree. There's also special tokens like this that will go on the top of the board near the Ever tree. And these represent different events you can place workers on later in the game to earn points for the end of the game. And so you'll just simply, again, place those at the top right next to the Ever tree. On top of that, there's a deck of event cards that you want to shuffle, and then you'll place 4 of them on the second from the top row of the Ever tree. Again, these are events you can place workers on later in the game, and in order to activate these cards, you would need to place a worker on them later in the game, but at the same time, you need to have the different cards activated, listed on the card, already in your city. When you do so, you just simply follow through on the instructions and then earn that many points at the end of the game. But once you've placed 4 of them on the Ever tree, you can then set the rest of the deck off to the side. There's also a pile of forest cards, and these are pretty much additional locations you'll be able to place workers on throughout the game. And so you'll shuffle these up and you'll place them on the forest spots here on the board. In a 2-player game, you'll use 3 of the cards and leave 1 location empty. But in a 4-player game, you'll use all 4 spots. And then again, once you've done that, you can set these cards off to the side. Now this is the basic setup of the game, and now we'll walk you through how to actually play. So on each turn, players have 3 different kinds of actions they can take. And so this is simply placing a worker, playing a card, or preparing for the next season. So again, placing a worker is very simple. Just take your worker piece here and place it on one of the open locations for workers to go. Now you can see, looking at the paw prints here, one of the locations is exclusive, and that's where there's a closed circle around the paw print. And there's also a shared option where it's an open circle around the paw print. So when you're placing workers, only 1 worker can be at a closed paw print, but if there's an open location, any number of workers can be placed there. You'll simply just place the worker on the board, and the location I chose there has a resin image and a card image. So in that case, I would simply take 1 resin and draw a card from the deck under the Ever tree. Play would then pass to the next player, where they can place their worker on a location and gather resources. If they choose, they can prepare for the next season, or they can play a card from either their hand or from the meadows in the middle. So let's say that player took the 3 log spot on that side. It would go to the next player's turn. So in this case, I place my worker on a location that gives you 3 berries. So I would simply take those, and then it would move back to the next player. So in this case, I took the 2 resin, and then it would go back to the next player. And at this point, I don't have any more workers to place, but I would have the opportunity to play any cards that might be in my hand, or again, that might be in the meadows. So in this case, let's say I play this postal pigeon. It's worth 2 berries, and the cost of the cards will always be on the left here. So I could simply play that card, pay the 2 berries, and now I will activate what's written on the card. So in this case, it says reveal 2 cards, and so I would take that from the draw deck under the Ever tree. It then says I can play 1 card up to a value of 3 for free, and I discard the other card. So in this case, I could play the 1 or the 2. Let's say I draw the 2. I would then discard the other card. And now, since I played that card, I would activate its ability. In this case, it says draw 2 cards, keep 1 of them, and give the other to an opponent. So again, I've got the 2 cards here. I can keep 1 of them, give 1 of the opponent. King's kind of a rare card. It's worth more points. So maybe I'll keep this, and I'll give this card to the other player. Again, now it would go back to the other player. They would have a turn where, again, they could either place a worker if they had any, play a card from either their hand or the meadows if they have the resources to do so, or they could prepare for the next season. Let's say I didn't want to do any cards and I want to prepare for the next season. That action's pretty simple. What you'll do is you'll take back all of your workers, and then you'll also take the worker and take the action on the corresponding symbol depending on the season you're moving on to. So in this case, the symbol has +1 worker, and it's a little hard to see back there, but it also has this green plant symbol. And so that means you would activate all of your cards with that associated symbol again at the start of the season before your turn. Again, play will go back and forth between players like this, where each turn they can go to one of the open locations, play a card from their hand or the meadow, or again prepare for the next season. Now there is an area on the board down here where you're not able to play until it's autumn, or basically the final round of the game. And with those locations, you have to discard so many cards equal to the point value listed on the board. So the points go 2, 3, 4, 5. So again, if you wanted to place one of your workers there, you would have to discard that many cards with an associated number of points to earn those points at the end of the game. But again, that's only available in the final round. Anytime a card is played from the meadows area, so again, if you had the corresponding resources to purchase that card and move it to your city area, simply take the card, put it into your city area, and then you would immediately replace it with a new card. This now might be available for purchase for the next player if they choose to. Again, when it comes to the special events at the end of the board, they have an associated symbol with it and a number next to it. So for example, it might have a 4 and the number of plant symbols. If you have that many cards in your city area, you could place a worker there then, get that point resource, and add that to your point total for the end of the game. And again, like I had already mentioned, there's the event cards at the top. If you match both of the critters or construction places listed on those cards, and you place a worker there, you'll get the corresponding points at the end of the game and any additional features that card grants you. You just simply need to read the card to see what that does. Another thing to note is that each player's city can only hold 15 cards. So you can never play more creatures or have more construction buildings over that 15 number. So it's something to keep in mind for the end of the game. Another neat feature is at the bottom right of some construction cards, you'll see a creature name and an image of a creature. And so what that means, if you've played this card into your city, you could actually play this creature card, the monk in this case, for free from your hand or from the meadow. So that could be a powerful aspect of your strategy as well. Some cards also, like you can see with the monastery here, have spaces where you could place workers to activate the ability on the card as well. On top of that, there's some cards that have an open sign as well as placement locations. For those, the opposing player and yourself could place workers here to activate that ability. So something to keep in mind with the cards you have played in your city. Outside of that, on your final turn, if you decide to not take any more actions, you can simply pass, and once all players have passed, the game ends and you'll count the final score for each player. So a simple way to do that, you'll just count the numbers for points listed on the card. If you have any event spaces that you've claimed, those have a point value associated with it, so you can count that. And then some cards like the school, for example, give you a bonus point, in this case, for each common critter that you have in your city. So you'd want to count up any extra bonus points you might have at the time as well. Also, if you have any critters here in the journey section, count the number of points associated with that. And again, if you have any individual point tokens, count those as well. Resources aren't really worth anything at the end of the game, so try and use them all if possible. And the player with the most points will win at the end of the game. If there is a tie, it could come down to the number of resources that you have. So that's more of a tiebreaker than actually helping you to win the game. If it's still tied, the player with the most completed events will win the game. But overall, that's really the basics on how you play Everdell. Certainly consult the rulebook if you have additional questions. Most of the cards are pretty self-explanatory on how they work as well, but each card is broken down further in the rulebook if you do have additional questions. There is a solo mode to the game as well if you choose to play that way, but I won't go into how that works on this video. But again, now that you have a better idea on how the game works, let's jump into my review. Well, again, now that you guys know a bit more about the game and how it works, how do I actually feel about it? Well, I really like the overall concept of Everdell. It's pretty fun getting to play as these woodland creatures trying to build a city and gather resources to survive the upcoming winter. I think that's a cool concept. I really like the artwork of the game as well, getting to see these cute woodland creatures building structures and cities and castles and much more. On top of that, I really enjoy the fact that the game is pretty easy to learn. There's not really a lot of complex actions you need to take on a turn. It's just placing a worker, playing a card if you have the resources, or preparing for the next upcoming season. So that's pretty simple. But outside of that, the strategy behind your decisions can get pretty complex, which I really like. I routinely found myself having multiple cards in my hand, seeing cards on the meadow, seeing different open spots where I could place my workers, and kind of mapping out 5 or 6 turns in advance. And so I really thought that was a lot of fun, getting to play that way. But on top of that, even though you can have a lot of strategy behind your ongoing decisions, your overall strategy can definitely change on a moment's notice, depending on what the other players do in the game as well. Again, there's that shared meadow area. Everyone's kind of competing over the different places you can place your workers. And so sometimes you might place a worker in anticipation of what your opponents might be doing, just as much as you might be placing a worker to benefit you in your strategy that you have going. And so that's a lot of fun. Do you want to play more of a sabotage role or stick with your own strategy and ignore what other people are doing? But then, like I said, your strategy might need to change because you might have made 3 or 4 decisions leading up to a point of getting a card in the meadow and somebody else takes it. Or you might need to place a worker in a specific spot that's going to assist you in your plan in the next few moves you have, but another player takes that, and now you need to come up with a totally different strategy to achieve your same goals. So I think that's a lot of fun. Like I said, it's simple to learn, but hard to master. And I think this really adds to the replay value of the game, especially since there's a bunch of different event cards that you're going to play out differently every single game. There's different forest cards you're going to lay out, so it gives you kind of more resource options for placing your workers, and that's going to be a different experience every time. The cards that come out in the meadow and in your hands are different every time, so you're going to have to play accordingly. And then obviously, again, you're going to have to counter potentially what your other players are doing in the game, which just adds to even more fun as well. I like that the playtime isn't super long, even though it can kind of get pretty complex in your head and making choices. The overall game usually takes around 40 to 60 minutes for a 2-player game. And then again, like a 60-minute plus or minus playtime, depending on if you have more players and how long each player decides to take their specific turns. A lot of times though, at least for me, I tend to have a general idea of my strategy. So when it finally gets to my turn, unless another player completely sabotaged it up to that point, I usually pretty much know exactly what I'm going to do, so my turns go pretty fast in that case. Another thing I really like about the game is that it has really great components. So for example, the berries look like berries, they kind of almost feel like berries. There's little pebbles for the stone resources that feel like little stones. The twigs look really realistic as well. And so I thought that's really cool, that attention to detail, as well as the great artwork on the cards themselves, and even the 3D Evertree that you assemble for each game. I'm definitely a big fan of it. I like the artwork style. It's cute. It's cool to see these little woodland creatures building cities and castles and the various different types of construction you can make throughout the game, as well as seeing the different unique creatures in their different roles. So things like shopkeepers that are bunnies, and mice that are farmers, and much more. It's really cool to see that as well. The concept and theme and art style is definitely family friendly, so that's great. Like I said, it's simple to play the game and understand it, but it's definitely fun for more hardcore gamers as well, because like I said, there's multiple different layers to the strategy you can work in, which is a lot of fun. Now, I really enjoy it as a 2-player game, but it definitely scales well the more players you add, and there's even a solo mode to the game as well. So I really think anybody can enjoy it no matter how many players you have for the game. On top of that, there's several expansions for the game. So if you really like this base game, there's more to play, additional aspects you can add to enhance the replay value with the expansions. But even this base game is a ton of fun, and I think the replay value is enormous. I know coming into it, I hadn't really played a lot of worker placement games, and so I didn't know if I would necessarily like the genre. But after playing Everdell, I really found that I've enjoyed the worker placement type games, and I'm excited to check out more of them because this was such a great experience. But let me know in the comments below if you've played Everdell yet, how you feel about it. Have you picked up any of the expansions? Do you like this base game best? Let me know in the comments below. If you guys want to pick up a copy and haven't done so yet, there'll be a link in the description below where you can do so as well. And if you guys like this video, be sure to smash that like button as it really helps out the channel. And if you like videos like this on video games, board games, and everything nerdy, check out one of our other videos here. And if you haven't done so yet, be sure to subscribe and turn on the bell notifications to get the latest updates of new nerd videos we put out. But once again, thanks for tuning in, and we'll talk to you more soon.